This is an exciting episode that I recorded live at the 2024 ACTFL Convention and Language Expo in Philadelphia. Now, this year's ACTFL theme was Connect for the Love of Languages, and this highlights the importance of building meaningful connections in every aspect of language teaching. So in this episode, you'll hear from inspiring educators and leaders who share strategies for connecting with students, fostering cultural understanding, and growing professional networks. These conversations that we had at the CLET World Languages booth in the exhibit hall capture the energy and passion of language teachers that are united in their love for teaching and learning. So let's jump in. Are you a language teacher looking for some reassurance that what you're doing in the classroom is on the right track? Or maybe you're looking for some ways to teach even more effectively? If you're one or the other or somewhere in between, you've landed in the right place. This is the World Language Classroom Podcast with your host, me, Joshua Cabral. You're about to get tips, tools, and resources so that your students continue to rise in proficiency and communicate with confidence. Let's jump in. Vamos, allons-y. Hello, my friends. Bonjour, mes amis. Hola, mis amigos. Welcome to the World Language Classroom Podcast. I am Joshua Cabral, and thank you, as always, for taking the time out of your week to listen to this podcast about language teaching. Hopefully, you're getting inspired by what you're hearing. You're getting some reassurance that you're on the right track of what's going on in your classroom, but you are an incredible language teacher for just taking the time to just look at your craft a little bit each week in addition to everything else that you're doing. So thank you so much for doing that. And I'm really excited about this episode because, as you heard in the intro, I recorded it live at ACTFL 2024, which was in Philadelphia. And for me, this was my first time back to ACTFL in about 6 years. So it was a really great opportunity to connect with friends and colleagues and teachers that I have worked with, that I've been in workshops with, that I've been in their schools. And most excitingly, I had the opportunity to connect with so many of you podcast listeners. Either we had conversations or we had quick connections as I was going down the escalator and I'd hear you yell out and say, "Thank you so much for the podcast. I love listening." And in so many of these conversations, I would hear specific episodes that you remember or guests that I've had or insights I've provided to you. And that is so reassuring and motivating to hear that. So thank you so much for all of you that had conversations with me. And I always ask, so where do we hang out together? Because I like to know where people are listening. Are we driving in the car? Are you doing laundry? Some people don't do that at all because they're taking notes, but I love to hear all that because this is a real relationship that we have together, and I just love that opportunity to speak with you and to also hear from some of you suggestions for upcoming topics or guests to have on. I talked to a number of people in their workshops or in the exhibit hall in different places that I will have on the podcast because we had such great conversations, and I said we should do this so that everybody can hear it. So all of those connections that happen at conferences are incredible, and ACTFL is a great place for that. So great to meet all of you if you're listening right now, and if you're listening and I haven't met you, hopefully at some time we will meet in person so we can have that personal connection as well. So while I was at ACTFL, I had the opportunity to do a workshop, and it was in collaboration with CLET World Languages. So I did one of their exhibitor sessions, and it was titled More Than Rules, Teaching Grammar in Context. And it was interesting because I did this workshop at 8:15 on Saturday morning, and I thought, who's going to come to this Teaching Grammar in Context at 8:15 on a Saturday morning? And it was a lot of teachers who came, and it was a great conversation. We got through a lot in 45 minutes, but thank you so much to CLET World Languages for inviting me in to do this, for this opportunity to connect with teachers. And then in addition to that, they invited me to do a podcast episode right there in the exhibit hall at their booth. So thanks so much for that opportunity because you don't get that everywhere. And as you will hear in the conversations that I had with teachers, the vibrancy of the exhibit hall you could hear going on around them. So the theme for ACTFL in 2024 was Connect for the Love of Languages. And so I had the opportunity to have these conversations with 5 particular individuals who are teachers as well as leaders in the language teaching, language learning world. And so they have some diverse voices because they are from across the country and they're each sharing their unique approaches to building connections in the language classroom and through language learning, which was the ACTFL theme. So I spoke with Caroline Schlegel, who is a Spanish teacher in Frederick County Public Schools in Maryland, and also with Aubrey Swisher, who is also a Spanish teacher in Washington County Public Schools in Maryland. And Caroline and Aubrey also collaborated on a workshop for CLET World Languages at ACTFL as well. Then I spoke with Sarah Stefanich, who is the Professional Development Coordinator at CLET. And then I spoke with Maria Carrera, who is the Executive Director of AATSP. And also I spoke with Patrick Wallace, who was the Program Specialist for World Languages and Global Workforce Initiatives in the state of Georgia. And he is currently the Strategic Relationship Specialist at CLET. So I had really insightful conversations with all of them, and I found 5 threads of topics that came up in these conversations. So what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about each one of those threads that came up, and then you'll hear directly from some of the teachers sharing their insights on it. I'll do a little summary, we'll move on to the next one, and that's how we will go through this episode. So the first topic that was really prominent was the topic of connection in language learning. So how is connection a core part of language learning and teaching? So for this, you're going to hear from Caroline Schlegel and Aubrey Swisher, who are both Spanish teachers in Maryland, as well as from Sarah Stefanich, who is the Professional Development Coordinator at CLET World Languages.
So I think for me, connections, they're the core part of who we are as humans in general. It's almost a basic social need for us to want to connect with others. And so it's integral in our classes that we are showing students how important it is to connect. I think with the world today being so very digital, the importance of our language classes has increasing importance because we're teaching students how to connect, to communicate, to relate to each other. And I think that's critical.
So connections and community are at the heart of what we do. We know that's one of our core practices that we're always trying to hit with students, but also even if you're not looking at those laid out, that is the whole reason why we're world language teachers, is because we want to bridge those gaps and make it so that we have these global citizens that can speak and interact with people across the world, foster these relationships that are going to benefit us in our personal lives, our public lives, and hopefully, bring a collaborative spirit to the world that we live in. In the classroom, connections, I think, start with the students themselves. I think it's wonderful that we can celebrate diversity and we talk about heritage with our students. And not only do we study all the different heritage and different cultural backgrounds of the Spanish-speaking communities in my Spanish classroom, but we love for the students to make those connections with different types of people as well. So I love to also have students tie in their own heritage, whether it goes back to a Spanish-speaking country or not. We love to look at those different similarities and differences and start to look at things as interesting, intriguing, instead of something that's like, oh, that's weird or I don't understand it. We tend to explore it. Whenever you do this with your kids, I think they become closer as a group. You get to tell those own stories that you have as well, and then pull in different experiences of guest speakers and things like that. So I think it really fosters relationships.
Yeah, so I think connection is a fundamental part of language learning and teaching, as fundamental part of the classroom. I grew up in, a rural town in Ohio where there wasn't really, population of Spanish speakers. And I somehow found this deep connection to the language, and it has kind of driven my personal and professional life to date. And so I love that for students, and being able to kind of open their eyes to find a connection that they might not have otherwise seen, that they might not get on a day-to-day basis. And we also know that motivated learners, right? Motivation is a really important part of the language learning classroom. And so if they can find a connection to the language, to the community, to a topic, that will motivate them. And then that kind of inspires them to keep going and to take more classes and kind of love the language and the culture the way we do.
So some useful insights there with Caroline talking to us about the human need for that social interaction, particularly in a digital world that we're in right now. And then Aubrey Swisher looking at the fact that this is a core practice for students and we are bridging that gap within our communities and making global citizens. And then with Sarah talking about that connection to language students who are finding a connection with the language and the world. So the next topic that came up was about connecting specifically with students in the classroom and fostering meaningful connections with our students as we are teaching them and as we are building those relationships. So here we are going to hear from Aubrey Swisher, who is a Spanish teacher in Washington County Public Schools in Maryland. And then we are also going to hear from Maria Carrera, who is the executive director of AATSP. And then we will also hear from Patrick Wallace, who was the program specialist for world languages and global initiatives in the state of Georgia, and now works as the strategic relationship specialist at CLED.
Every day, we are working together to have those interpersonal conversations. Interpersonal speaking or writing tasks are great practices in the classroom, but then to do those off the cuff too, have spontaneous conversation. We do love to pull in different community members who have different backgrounds. Maybe they are a native speaker, a heritage speaker, or they have had some study abroad experience, something like that. And students are able to see what they can do with their skills, where they can go, and also that they have similarities to these people that have such different backgrounds. And same thing with me, I try to be really real with my students and share who I am and share my passion. And I think whenever they see that I kind of that I'm open with them, it lowers their affective filter, not just with language, but with the content that they are sharing. And we really do become, almost a family.
When I teach heritage languages, or better, when I used to teach heritage languages, I'm no longer teaching, unfortunately, and I do miss it a lot, though I'm excited about the work I'm doing. I am one of them. I present myself not as an authority on language, but as somebody who has experienced and continues to experience what they are going through. And what are some of those things? Well, there's language insecurity, and that never leaves you. And there's language insecurity in both of your languages. There's a sense of inauthenticity, that people don't see you as a real, let's say Latina in my case, because I'm not from there. I'm from here, right? But people also don't see you as a real American. So when you're around so-called Americans, they're like, well, where are you really from? So these are the areas of struggle that you have to learn to manage and find that place, your happy place where you are with that. So we talk a lot about that. And we also talk about all the joys that we experience as heritage language learners and speakers, how we're able to navigate between two cultures and see two different points of view. And that also is very, very valuable. So I like to think of it as, for me, is becoming a more fulfilled and happy heritage language speaker as I'm teaching heritage languages.
I think for me, the biggest thing I always think is you kind of approach them from a student perspective. I always love music, so I always use that in the classroom. That was very effective. I also think that it's important to have a vision for every day when you walk in the door. Not only a vision for that day, but also a vision about what you want them to accomplish, about where they're going. A lot of what we do as teachers, that's so much extra, whether it's chaperoning a trip overseas or chaperoning a club. We do those things because we understand the importance of building that vision for students. It's more than what we do in those 50 to 60 minutes. It's what we do all throughout the day. So what we build into our programs that can help them do that, I think that's really important.
So more incredible insights from these teachers in looking at strategies for connecting with students and that idea of interpersonal conversations and keeping them spontaneous, and also bringing in speakers of the language so that students can connect with them and understand how it's used in the world. And then Maria Carrera, the executive director of ATSP, pointing out that she doesn't approach it as being an authority, but as a person with the same experiences that the students have had. So important to remember there. And then looking at this connecting being an approach from a student perspective, and then having that vision of what they can see happen with the language as they move outside of the classroom. The next topic that came up through these conversations was about building cultural connections, and this is connecting students to different cultures and communities. So we will hear from Caroline Schlegel, who is a Spanish teacher in Maryland, and Aubrey Swisher, who is a Spanish teacher in Maryland, and then from Maria Carrera again, who is the executive director of AATSB.
So I think culture is the driving force behind also everything that we do. We want to teach the target language through exploring the target culture, right? So we want people to see what it looks like to be in a different space. How do you greet each other? How do you say good morning? What is your daily routine? And I think when we show students the world, when we allow them to see the world through a different lens, it lets them see something more meaningful, more wholesome, more holistic.
This gets students really excited to continue their language journey. It has purpose. They can see what they can do with the skills that they are acquiring, and it is real. I think that if you're showing students the different cultures that they can interact with, or that they will better understand someone's perspective, this is very enlightening, and it just makes them bigger, better people with a broader perspective.
America is the fifth most linguistically diverse country in the world. The only first world country that is on the top 5 of that list. 350 languages are spoken in the United States. And as you know, Spanish is very widely spoken. We might be the 3rd or 4th largest Spanish-speaking country in the world. Our students are fundamental to making that connection, not just to other countries or with other countries, but within the United States, making our languages legitimate languages, part of the American landscape, the linguistic landscape of our country. So it's fundamental, I think.
These cultural connections are so important, and as Caroline Schlegel pointed out, is that driving force and teaching language through culture. And then Aubrey went on to talk about the idea that it gives us purpose to this skill that we're teaching students, and then how they can use the language, and then all those details about the United States and how linguistically diverse it is with 350 languages. And so we heard a lot from Maria Carrera about really engaging with the culture that is among us right here within the USA right now. The next theme that came up in terms of connections was about professional connections within the teacher community. And through these conversations, there was a lot of advice for teachers that came up for teachers who are looking to deepen their own professional connections. And here we will hear from Sarah Stefanich, who is the Professional Development Coordinator at CLET World Languages, and then from Maria Carrera, the Executive Director at AATSP, and Patrick Wallace, who is the Strategic Relationship Specialist at CLET.
Yeah, I think this is a great question. And one of the things I love most about the teaching community is our willingness to share with one another, to share ideas, to share concepts, lessons, and to kind of talk. And how are things going with you? Oh, great. How did you do that lesson? And so, when available, I always recommend go to conferences, talk to teachers, go to the talks, introduce yourself to the presenter afterwards, and kind of be open-minded and willing to listen and to share, and even with your own colleagues. You might think, I teach Spanish, so maybe I don't have much in common with the French teachers or the German teachers or the Chinese teachers because our languages are very different. But there's more in common than you think, and I love kind of that cross-language collaborations as well.
It brings us joy. It makes us better teachers. It makes us more connected teachers. Sometimes I hear from teachers that they're not happy where they are, or maybe they're happy, but the department doesn't have the same priorities, doesn't appreciate what they want to do. When you connect with people outside of your department, you find people that are like-minded and that are going to help you grow and do what brings you joy and purpose.
I think for teachers to deepen, there's a couple things. One is I think connecting with other teachers is super important, and that's what you do, Joshua, and others do very well. And I've seen it happen with, when I'm not going to say how old I was, but back in my day, the internet, was kind of a new thing. So what's really encouraging for me, or has been, is that we've been able to build a teacher community here, and we're able to do it through a lot of technology, So I think that has really revolutionized how we as teachers connect. So I definitely would encourage teachers to learn from other teachers, connect to other teachers. Even in a passive way, you can receive so much, but I think I think it's also for us professionally a growth opportunity to grow as well. We receive a lot from other teachers. We should be able to give something back to that community as well.
You often hear me talk about how generous I think language teachers are. I think all teachers are, but I specifically know a lot of language teachers, so I speak from that perspective. But as we heard there from Sarah Stefanich, that there is this incredible willingness to share among teachers, and this is really helping for those professional development connections and for those professional connections in general. And then Maria Carrera went on to just mention and focus on the idea of joy, and that teachers want to connect outside of their own classrooms and districts and schools sometimes. So this is a really useful way for them to continue their learning. And that is what Patrick Wallace pointed out, is that with this connecting to other teachers, you're building a community. And he specifically talked about doing it through technology, but also through conferences as well. And then to finish up this conversation, I wanted to share with you some of the thoughts that these 5 individuals shared about why they love what they do, whether that's teaching or working with teachers or leading an organization. Why do they love what they do? And so we're going to hear from everyone here.
Yeah, so I love teaching languages because it opens your eyes to the world, right? Connecting with people, knowing who people are, understanding what they do. And this relates back to what I was saying earlier, just opening the door for kids to learn how to communicate and connect with people. I love it because I have experienced communicating and connecting with people, being able to speak Spanish in a different capacity than if I did not. And so showing students that importance, bringing people into the classroom, showing them the world through not just a window, they can also reflect on themselves and have this mirror. It's just wonderful. Language teaching is such a beautiful, beautiful profession.
I love teaching languages because I know that I am giving students a skill that they are going to apply, whether they are speaking the language that I'm teaching them, or these are going to be skills that they can transfer to their own communication in their first language. I know that they are getting things that are going to be real and transferable. Every day, we are focusing on language, but also in a cultural lens. So I tell my students, you might struggle at some point with the language, but focus on why we're doing it and what we're doing it for. And so whenever we're exploring those cultures, it makes everything so real, and it has that built-in meaning. And it's not just looking at grammar or vocabulary, but it's trying to understand different people, different materials. And when you can do that, it's so empowering. So I just love that because I think we become bigger people. I am trying to pour in all of my skills to my students. And when I can see them say something back to me or appreciate something, it validates everything that I'm doing and it reinvigorates me. So I think me sharing my passion with them, it's a two-way street. Whenever they are also eager and excited, it really gives me a feeling of fulfillment.
I love languages. I'm just a language nerd. I don't know where it came from. Nobody else in my family speaks a language other than English. I'm the only one that is bilingual in any way, shape, or form. And so it's very much a part of who I am, and I'm very fortunate in my current job with World Languages to get to connect with teachers on a daily basis. And I absolutely love it because teachers they're wonderful human beings, and they love what they do, and they love kind of bettering the lives of their students and learning about different ways and different aspects that they can do that in new activities, and kind of seeing teachers evolve and the profession evolve with new technologies and new theories and methods. And it's just absolutely wonderful, and I'm happy every day that I get to do that.
I don't connect what I do with a love of languages or passions. I connect it with what I am. So it's sort of like asking me, why do you love to eat? Well, because human beings love great flavors. We enjoy them. So for me, because of my background, I was born speaking Spanish. I grew up speaking Spanish. English became part of who I am too, my linguistic and cultural makeup. And so it's just part of living what I am. And it's the best way that I know of living what I am. If I weren't teaching languages, I wouldn't be fulfilling that essential piece of who I am.
So my role at the state level was I was the program specialist for World Languages and Global Workforce Initiatives, and what that entailed was really interesting. So I was given, of course, support for all our world language teachers throughout Georgia. You're talking about urban, metro, rural situations, a variety of different situations, dual language immersion. But in addition to that, what was interesting is you were also in quasi the International Affairs Department of the Georgia Department of Education. So I think in that role, what I've appreciated so much about that role is just I served as a bridge between policy and practice. So my role was to understand the policy and get involved in that and be that layer of government that relates the needs that of those of the practitioners, our teachers, what we need, what our systems need, and try to influence the government in a way to meet those needs. It was never always a perfect fit, but the biggest role I think for someone in that position is as advocate, but also as connector. I always talked about the importance of synergy, building synergy, making people feel part of a team, making them feel supported. At the state level, we have local control state, so there's not much we can do to step in to change a principal or a superintendent's mind. But we could definitely try to do that in terms of on the what I call soft power and what countries call soft power. It's basically about making sure that they understand the importance of more than just the language aspect, the importance of having a language teacher in your school and what they also bring in terms of the perspective they bring and everything else.
I always appreciate hearing when teachers love what they do. Hearing the reasons why they love what they do, why they continue doing it, why they engage in professional development to get a little better. But we heard from Caroline Schlegel here, who again is a Spanish teacher in Maryland, that it opens our eyes to the world. And that's the reason why she loves doing this. She loves bringing that to her students. It's opening their eyes to the world. And then Aubrey Swisher, another Spanish teacher from Maryland, was just talking about giving students a skill that they will actually apply, and it really feels necessary and relevant to them. And then Sarah Stefanich, who's the professional development coordinator at CLET World Languages, she works with teachers and she helps them and she works with them in a professional capacity, and she loves to see that they want to keep learning. And then we heard from Maria Carrera, who had a little bit of a different take on it, where she was saying that she connects this whole idea of language and language learning and teaching to fundamentally who she is. And then we heard from Patrick Wallace, who was really looking at this idea of bridging policy and practice and looking at what teachers need and advocating and finding that synergy, as he referred to it, and looking at that perspective that language teachers bring to a school as a particular lens. And it is really exciting to make sure that language teachers are in schools because of that global lens that they bring to the curriculum and all that students are learning and what everyone is doing. So these were incredibly inspiring conversations. They were wonderful. They were much longer than I've shared here, but there are a lot of great topics that came up, but I wanted to find a way to bring them all together so you could hear them in a cohesive way right here, but all based on the ACTFL theme from this year at the conference, which was connect for the love of languages. But thank you so much once again to Clet World Languages for inviting me and the other speakers in to do workshops for them at ACTFL this year, as well as having the opportunity to record the podcast in the exhibit hall right there at their booth so that we could get the vibrant feeling and the excitement that's happening all around. And a huge appreciation to the listeners that I spoke with and to everyone who took the time to sit down with me and bring this to you. Be sure to check out the show notes to sign up for Talking Points, my weekly email newsletter with tips and resources for language teaching. And there are also links to get in touch with me if you would like to work together. And remember, we can do this in person in your school, or we can do it remotely. Great to meet you all at ACTFL, and hopefully if I haven't met you yet, we will meet soon and take that selfie that everyone seems to love to take. But I will talk to you soon. Bye for now. Thank you for listening to the World Language Classroom podcast. Be sure to follow or subscribe wherever you're listening so that you never miss an episode. Let's keep the conversation going on social media. Connect with me on X, aka Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at WL Classroom. And for even more valuable resources, visit my website, WLClassroom.com, where you'll find over 300 blog posts about language teaching. So stay inspired, keep growing, and continue making a difference in your language classroom.